It is now my privilege and pleasure to introduce the Executive Vice President of Highland, Brenda Kirk. Give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning. On behalf of Highland Software, welcome to Blockland. We are so excited to have you here today. What a phenomenal showing. It's really quite an honor. Blockland is truly an ecosystem in the works. It's a collaboration of the willing. It is a group of leaders who have gotten together who said, hey, this region is worthy of building a framework of an ecosystem that can become the world's producer of blockchain applications. And we are so thrilled to be such an important part of that and to have you all here with us. Highland Software has been enduring technology evolution and change and leveraging that for the better part of 30 years. And we've been doing that really with a commitment to three things. And that is an unwavering commitment to mission and purpose and relentless conviction to our core values. It's those same three things, as I read through Beth Mooney's bio, that have taken her from secretary through 9 different titles, to land as CFO of a major bank. She has become a true powerhouse in banking. As a matter of fact, named so many times by American Banker as a truly powerful influence in banking that they've created a Hall of Fame for her. Fortune has named her as one of the 100 most powerful women, Forbes to the top 50. So there is no doubt Beth Mooney is an absolute powerhouse in banking, but she's also a powerhouse in leadership and in community. And she brings to life something that I aspire to each and every day, which is taking that leadership ability into the lives of the people that she meets, into her customers, into her employees, and into the community in which she works. She's doing that in spades today. She joins us this morning as Chairman and CEO of KeyBank. Please join me in welcoming Beth Mooney.
Good morning. And how is everyone this morning? We'll look forward to the opportunity to have a conversation, and I'm going to introduce my guest, and I think this is going to be a real interesting opportunity to look at some of the business attributes of blockchain and crypto technology. So first and foremost, I'm pleased to introduce John Donovan, who is the CEO of ATT Communications, someone whose company and career I truly admire. For those of you in the audience, I'm on the board of AT&T, so I've had the pleasure of knowing John for over 5 years, and I would tell you he in his own right is a futurist, a technologist, in addition to being not only a savvy but brilliant business manager and navigating on behalf of AT&T the world of technology and the many businesses and companies that they run. But I think I would tell you one of the things that I most admire about John is he's also a values-based leader, and that really resonates. And so I think we will have a wide-ranging discussion here today. So AT&T Communications, which is the non-Warner Media portion that was just recently acquired by AT&T, is the largest pay TV provider and one of the largest wireless providers in the United States. It also serves more than 3 million business customers on 6 continents. And as the CEO of AT&T Communications, John is responsible for AT&T's global telecommunications and U.S. video service businesses, including its business, mobility, and entertainment and technology and operations group. Since coming to AT&T from Silicon Valley in 2008, John's made his mark as a champion of innovation in software-defined networking and virtualization, open source collaboration, employee reskilling, and 5G. John serves on the board of Palo Alto Networks, and he's also authored 3 books. The most recent is Building the Network of the Future, Getting Smarter, Faster, and More Flexible with Software-Centric Approach, that was just published this year. So it is my pleasure to begin a conversation with John Donovan.
Thank you, Beth. That was really kind.
And we were laughing about introductions. You never as good or as bad as people say you are on both ends of the spectrum. AT&T has to be one of the busiest, most ambitious companies in corporate America. In no particular order, AT&T is one of the world's largest wireless carriers. You have one of the largest landline networks in the world. You're one of the largest satellite TV operators in the world. And you're not only one of the largest buyers of media content globally, but you're also one of the biggest owners of original content. And now you and AT&T are spearheading an effort into blockchain.
Yep.
Can you talk about how blockchain fits in the overall AT&T strategy for the audience?
We're at an interesting time, and I think as a technology executive, and I think of myself as a technology executive, I think every executive has to be somewhat of a technology executive, and if you don't know how you're going to be changing yourself with all of the landscape of what's moving in technology, then you have a target on your back and you just don't realize it. And so I think that in that regard, it's everybody's job, I think, as an executive to understand the big shifts, that the things that are going to be foundational and architectural, and everything's going to move with it. And so I don't want to appear to be hyperbolic in my language, but blockchain is one of those things, because it is an architecture which moves the world back to a very highly distributed architecture. And so everything changes. Networking changes. You mentioned a bunch of our assets and businesses. There's not one of them that isn't going to be affected by what blockchain is able to do, whether it's chain of custody, contracting, as we just learned. And by the way, I don't know if anybody in the audience, there was a mistake on one of those charts. I wanted to see if anybody picked it up. I'm kidding. So from our standpoint, we are in every business, in the headlights, not in the distant horizon, we see applications for this technology.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the notion of we're all technology, whether it be executives or not just users and takers, but it is true that in running a company today that it is incredibly important to be technologically, well, you don't have to be a practitioner, but understanding and thinking ahead. A couple years ago, I had the benefit of a board retreat with our board at Key, where we talked about high beam leadership, which is that notion that you really do have to see ahead, and technology is probably the biggest thing on the horizon. And one of the quotes that I got out of that I always love sharing is, because technology can be disruptive, it can be frightening. It's changing business in ways that maintaining relevance and maintaining the ability to see ahead is hard. But if you hate change, you're really going to hate extinction. So
yeah, exactly.
I think we're in one of those moments today where we're talking about things that are going to transform.
There's only so many jobs in a museum. Yeah.
So one of the areas that I know AT&T has talked about, and you might want to elaborate as we go on places where you see it applicable to your business, AT&T is a large buyer of digital media.
Right.
And it is increasingly focused on being a provider of digital advertising solutions. So has blockchain gone into your thinking around that work as a buyer of advertising, and is it going to be part of how AT&T launches and ramps up its own digital advertising business?
Yeah, one of the challenges when you have something that's this big architecturally coming at you is to figure out, in the overall scheme of things, of where you could put and apply your energy and technology, where's the biggest benefit? So you sort of build this little simple view that says, how big is the opportunity and how hard is it to go get it? And you don't want to waste time dabbling around when the prize isn't big, because people don't get excited about it. And so when you look at the things that are going to fundamentally change our business, one of them is ads. We are one of the largest purchasers of advertising, no surprise to anybody in this room who watches television, how many commercials we get. We're in industries that are very aggressive in advertising. And then you look at digital advertising, which is supposed to be an improvement because it's targeted. Not a lot of people realize that a lot of those dollars can be wasted because you don't see inside the black box of the advertisers. Google, Facebook, they serve you demographics, but there's this entire chain that goes on behind it of how ads get placed that involves not just the things we read about in manipulation of how things are, fake versions of things are being put up, but there's also massive fraud, click fraud, where machines are giving the appearance that your ads are being served. And so that is an ideal scenario where you'd say blockchain and its chain of custody is an amazing tool to go make that entire industry change. And so whether you are one of those people placing ads or whether you're like us, a big purchaser of ads, and we operate in both environments, it's really transformational. And so it's one of the early use cases that we're going to be very, very focused on.
Well, and obviously, as you said, both a buyer and now a supplier of advertising. Can you talk a little bit also about how data and analytics, like you say, the digital advertising world is fastly becoming more prominent than what we would call print media, and how does that then enter into that realm, and how does AT&T think about that?
Yeah, I think that right now we're in transition where we have some good advertising and some bad advertising, and there are industries that grew up that nobody likes ads, but if you had the option of paying the full price for something or having something be ad supported, you'll tolerate ads. And so we're just now working our way through saying, on the NFL on Sunday, there's a reason that so many of the ads are truck ads, like Ford F-150. But if I just bought a car last week, then I'm going to try to avoid that ad. And so the ability to understand with data what I actually want to see and then be presented with that stuff that's not only not invasive advertising, it's actually stuff I want to see. Coming up in the holiday season, if I'm in the market for a new set of golf clubs, I actually would like to see what's out there. Who's playing with what? And what are the characteristics of it? And I might enjoy 20 minutes of commercials over a weekend with something I'm actually engaged in. And that's where the world is headed. We're trying to take this data, make it really rich, and allow the technology to operate in real time to allow the two of us to be watching the exact same thing in adjacent houses and see very different advertising. But there are also, as Nick was talking about, there's a lot of things in this world that operate on trust. Mm-hmm. And one of them is all of the machinery behind that ad in that business. And you really have to, I think blockchain is an excellent opportunity to take that whole business to another level that allows, more affordability for the consumers, more relevant ads for both the manufacturer and the purchasers, and then the ability to have a system that works because everybody trusts that if I say you saw it, you saw it.
Yeah, this notion of trust, because I know in our industry, for those of you in the room, a banker, and in financial services, where does our industry kind of flip into this new digital world? And one of the big issues is around the digitization of trust.
Right.
And can trust be digitized? So how do you think about blockchain and in a digital world? As you said, that it could be ripe with fraud and other issues in our industry. Trust is the bedrock of what we do because we have people's information and their money. Yeah. So how do you think about the notion of the digitization of trust? When
I look at your business, one of the things I always say that the currency and banking is one of the things that is most trust dependent. If I was interested in malfeasance, I wouldn't steal a bunch of money out of the banking system. I would actually just make people not trust their statements anymore. an occasional mistake from the ATM machine and I lose trust in that thing, and then all of a sudden you're like, my goodness, there's so many things about currency and banking that are trust-based. It's so pervasive for us in the networking business that we have operated for 142 years with a network that was based on, we refer to it internally as a what network. And now we're shifting to a who network because there's so much opportunity for trust to break down. And this is another thing that I think blockchain as a technology is fundamentally going to change how all networking is done. Local area networking, wide area network, wireless, wired, broadband, because everything is going to be centered around the authentication. If I can't trust you, then it's very difficult for me to up the amount of commercial activity I have with your bank, or whether I believe a news article that you sent to me, or whether in fact you're actually you. And so I think that is a profound opportunity for the next level of what we have to do, not only as companies operating in society, but as like actors in civilization. Like we're at that point where what we saw in the last election and all those sorts of things, where people are starting to learn how to weaponize the cracks in these systems. We not only have an opportunity with blockchain, I think we have an obligation. And I think that every industry has to view both the opportunity and the obligation. And you may come up short on the opportunity, but you should never, on behalf of your customers, come up short on the obligation.
The other area where I think AT&T is a leader, but also you could talk a little bit about the implications of blockchain, is the Internet of Things. And this world of devices and all sorts of things globally having an internet address and being able to be monitored or actually controlled, and connecting the world not only of people but of things. Talk about how blockchain and Internet of Things interact between each other or enhance each other.
Well, I've always said that everything technologically should be designed to eliminate steps and make life easier. And so now all of a sudden my machines talking to each other is like a really, really good thing, because I want the productivity of being able to manage my energy consumption a lot better, but I don't know why I need to engage with the power company. If my washing machine will do it on its own, then that's a much better thing for me. And I just don't think most people realize how drastically this Internet of Things is going to grow. And so now all of a sudden when everything is connected, the whole world becomes alive. And so now all of a sudden the earlier conversation that we had about trust and data and all that sort of stuff, this thing can get really haywire if the machines coordinating with machines are subject to fraud or malfeasance. And so I think that the Internet of Things creates such a giant attack surface for all the bad things that authenticating is going to be a really important part of what's going to enable it to grow to its full potential.
I did see 2001: A Space Odyssey. It can go really wrong.
Yeah. Oh,
when the computers take over.
Yeah.
But I know this is something that I've had privy to have some insights into, some of the really advanced applications of what's going on in this Internet of Things technology. And if you could think of just a couple examples that, as you look at it, are literally changing the world of business and the world of commerce, or how we all live in this Internet of Things.
Well, it's interesting because the best advice I can give people is the same advice I give my children. And I told my kids, go into an industry and learn how it works, and then pull your head up and take one of the following 5 technologies: interactive design, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and go disrupt it. That's the most meaningful thing that you can do and the biggest accomplishment you can likely do is to just apply it effectively. And so my daughter does interactive design, just basically man-machine interface, and my son does AI algorithms. And that's the advice that I give them. And I think that that's the Internet of Things is one of those core 5 technologies like AI and machine learning, blockchain, where you can take it and apply it almost anywhere to any type of problem and make it better. And I think the world will figure out in its use case how to build the next great company and maybe the next trillion-dollar market cap company, but the opportunities are going to be out there for years and years and years to apply this in areas that are fairly mundane from a story standpoint, but really effective for businesses like yours and mine.
Interesting. So as these technologies progress, how does because you would uniquely have a view on this, how does a 5G network become for the use case, both for Internet of Things, blockchain, and other emerging technologies? What is the distinction between a 4G and a 5G network generally, and then how does it relate to the reliability and use cases here?
It's interesting, and I may sound like I'm biased, and I likely am, but I think that question should be part of every conference like this in every technology. So if this was a room of 1,700 people and we were talking about virtual reality, we should be talking about 5G. If this was a group of retailers, we should be talking about 5G, because what 5G is going to do is it's going to be a massively scaled real-time network. And so that's gobbledygook to most people. But a real-time network that can operate as fast as the brain does, and with the ability to do compute in the network creates a whole new design. And so everything you do is subject to being able to be designed differently. So I always use the example of virtual reality. Instead of having a backpack and a headset, you'll be able to wear a pair of glasses. The backpack is for the compute. And if the compute can be done in the network, and it's so fast that it's as quick as if it were being done locally, then it changes the architectural design. So I think they should be in industrial design schools. They should be talking about 5G networks, because people shouldn't be designing to old architectures. The same way when we talk about blockchain and identity and we say, it's a who network, you shouldn't be designing processes based on what. You should be designing an architecture. So anybody who wants to do a startup or build a business has to be architecturally relevant. And it's obvious to people that are writing code, where you sit down and you say, okay, well, what language should this be in? And everybody says, well, that's just like that's a no-brainer. You have to be in a modern code language, but you have to have a modern architecture. And I think this is a thing that it's hard for a company like ours, because you have an army of people that grew up with the technology, and they're wedded to the technology, and they're resistive to change. And when you make and how you make the call that says we're going to do a student body left on a new architecture, it's tough, because you're going to have pockets of resistance. Some people are going to leave your organization because they'll view it as nothing short of a religious war. And so that's why I think I'm terribly impressed and intrigued that Cleveland would put on this event right now. I think it's very prescient that folks here would realize that this is an architectural shift, and they don't come along every day, and it has an opportunity to have a geographic signature on it, which can transform what goes on in a city. I was afraid they were asleep. Thank you.
I'm going to shift to one of my questions at the end, because you brought up Cleveland and our foresight to do this, but I have to say that a couple things you said in that commentary about 5G. We literally just last year retired a system that we had COBOL as part of it. And like you said, it was well depreciated. It was very low cost to run, but it was probably time to let it go. Not to mention everybody who supported it was past retirement age, and we were having to beg them to stay. And your point about it is a disruptor in the architecture, not just the application, and that's back to you're going to hate change, you're really going to hate extinction.
Right.
Because these are these kinds of pivots that we're talking about. So I'm going to ask the question you brought up about Cleveland. We are the city on the lake. I won't use some other terminology that we've been referred to. We have an incredible work ethic in this town. We are self-made and self-reliant, and we love to make fun of our own sports teams and our weather. But this was intentional by a group of civic leaders, really to bring this together, and I'm going to give kudos to Bernie Marino at the Marino Companies, Destination Cleveland, to put together a very ambitious 3 days to really start people thinking about this shift, this pivot that these new technologies are going to bring. You do business in cities all over the world. Talk a little bit about what it would take for Cleveland to become a city of choice for talent and technology, and really realize the potential of this next wave of technology, blockchain solutions and so forth. If it was a call to action, what would you say you think some of the ingredients of success will be?
Wow, that's a tough and tricky question. Let me start by just telling the audience a confession. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I would have thought that would have got a boo. So
we're polite, too.
Polite.
We're Midwesterners. We're polite.
Exactly. You left the polite part out. You know, this is a really interesting thing because there are tough calls here, because as a city, you can only bet a couple of these, and then people will start to say, well, there's another one of those. It's just one of those programs. But when they work, they're magic. And like when I go to Israel, that's now referred to as the startup nation. When they get it right, when you get it right, you have some of the world's best technology. Every new technology, folks take a flight over to Tel Aviv to figure out what they're working on. And so I view it as more about persistence than brilliance. And more about collaboration than capital. And so what that means is that you're going to have an intellectual hub, but you have to be in with the universities. You have to have, your intellectual energy has to be pointed to this. Your executive leadership needs to be pointed at this. And it will be some combination of investment and venture capital, but it's not going to be gigantic dollars. It's going to be shifts in some of the coursework at your best universities. It's going to be about your local companies becoming early adopters. And you did it with the Cleveland Clinic. You know, you look at it and you have world-class medicine that happens here that doesn't happen in a whole lot of other places, and it behaves kind of that way because you start to create a gateway to import the world's top talent because they want to come work on a problem. And so it takes a lot of recruiting and a lot of energy and a lot of collaboration between universities and companies and a modest amount of investment, and then you build a flywheel. And the flywheel, turns slowly in the beginning. And when I see it, most of the time, the cities run out of energy. They just get distracted with the other things and they don't stick with it. So, I mentioned to David in the back, my experience is the second this thing is over, start planning next year. Line up speakers that are a little better than this year.
Does that mean we're not coming back?
Well, you can average up, just get one, super exciting one. No, I think that it's a sustained effort. But when you see it work, there's always the obvious place to go for a technology, and then there's one or two cities that are non-obvious. So you look and you'd say that's true in the media business in production. That's true in the media business, in talent. That's true in the wireless business. And so the cities have pulled it off. And there are a lot of these hubs that are, strange things. Like St. Louis, for whatever reason, has some of the best back office programming on the planet in big volume. You want to go and scale back office systems, St. Louis is the place to go. And you look in there and you'd say, well, what is it? Their CIOs all talk to each other. If I'm going to downsize over here, then those guys say, I might need a group like that. So there's more of an employment security net. What makes Silicon Valley successful technologically is you can change jobs and keep the same parking space. And so, and that becomes true, and it becomes true in a technology. And so you get a few of the building blocks in place, you get together and you adapt, and you put your energy in so that you can sustain an effort, and then all of a sudden, your successes start to build, and then someone runs the flag up, and then you become an import location. And you'll get the things you don't need. It's a great city for a lot of reasons. It's gentrifying. You say it's on the lake. You don't have great weather, and it's not Pittsburgh, but you do have a lot going for you.
We got a lot of good water out there too, and this is an energy-intensive business as well. Some of these technologies.
Exactly.
So you were talking about how you kind of lock arms and make something happen. So I would have this question have two prongs to it. One prong are if you were a non-AT&T person and were thinking about how you would start some use cases and where you would start trying to civically build this muscle memory and create that distinctiveness. If you were running the world, where would you put that? And then just generally, how should some companies think about how to think of blockchain as a business case for their businesses?
Well, I think that, I mentioned earlier, it's as simple as saying, where's the biggest impact with the lowest friction? And I think if I were looking at it, if you made me mayor for the day, I'm not as, tall, dark, and handsome as your mayor, but I would probably get the companies together and say, where do we have common use cases? And then we can have a shared result. And there's enough of them out there, whether it's for authentication and security. And then, you're a large enough company, you have a large enough employers here, you can start to look and say, how do we get some of our suppliers? We're all going to be working on the same type of problem. And I would try to find the use case that applies across enough businesses where you can start to build a hub of expertise. And then I think I would do something that is counter-traditional. I would create the same governance structure across the companies that you would do within the companies. So I would have, once a month, have the CIOs, the top 10 companies get together and treat this as if it were an important project for a company. It is an important project. It's an important project for the city. And I think what Cleveland is doing aspirationally is awesome, because I think the city of the future is going to be one that can bring its citizens into entry-level work and then keep progressing them. Because I think a career in the future, a career can't last more than a decade. You can have more than a decade tenure with a company, and but you can't. Even your own job changes dramatically enough that if you went to Mars and came back, by the time you came back, it wouldn't look like your job anymore. And so I think when you look at this from a city perspective, cities have to think about, I need a bunch of entry-level jobs. For you to bring 1,000 jobs into Cleveland that requires high skill that you don't have in Cleveland, all you've done is imported 1,000 people, and you've driven up your real estate prices and made traffic worse. So you have to, within the infrastructure, import a little, but provide the opportunity, but you have to do it in a layered fashion that allows people that graduate high school to have great opportunities, people who graduate college to have great opportunities, people who come with STEM degrees have great opportunities, but none of those are dead ends, because you can always then progress to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think universities, my own alma mater, Notre Dame, I went to them and said, look, I think this whole education system needs to be disrupted. I have a great experience for 4 years, and then you send me letters and ask for money. And I would like for you to adopt me for life. And I don't have any problem giving you money every year if you give me something back. So why don't you do continuing education and executive education and do stuff online and charge me for it? Because, that's a better relationship. And I think cities are going to have to start to think that way. And so I applaud, the founders, if you will, of Blockland for having the vision to say, let's go take a shot, because when you have a big opportunity like this, I think you owe it to this entire community, both technical and not, to see if you can't organize to get something meaningful to happen.
Well, that's one, insightful, and two, very encouraging, because some piece of the civic fabric around this is, one, both that we are fortunate to have an incredible ecosystem of educational institutions here, as well as workforce opportunities where we see this as a chance to really create jobs at all different levels and really lift the economic inclusion in Cleveland, as well as make this a future economy. I know at AT&T, one of the things that you spearheaded was a lot of the reskilling of the workforce, because as you said, as this world changes, as how we use things, how technology takes over that which we used to do. Talk a little bit about the learnings from that work at AT&T about reskilling, because I think that's also a relevant part of our civic conversation.
Anybody in this room who is intimidated by these few days should not be discouraged. I think there's a mindset that has to change, where you should not permit yourself to say, I'm not a technical person. Because there's three categories, if you will, of technology. The first is just literacy, and everybody can be, whether it's blockchain or 5G, you can become literate. And then there's a whole bunch of things that need to occur. It's sort of like moving to a foreign country. You have to buy in to at least learn the language if you're going to be successful. You can maybe function, but to be successful, you have to learn the language. That's true of technology. So I tell every person at AT&T, nobody is allowed to say, I'm not a technical person, because you immediately are, and so when you talk, no one is going to listen, and you won't be invited to meetings, because what you've said is, I'm opting out of the future. So you're not allowed to do that. And that's an important element. And so some of our education is designed to get people comfortable with the new language. Whether it's 5G, blockchain, whatever, you're going to go in and you're going to just learn the language, and you might have to look at it over and over again, but you have a basic literacy that allows you to be in the room and a contributing person to bring your experience to bear. The second, and once you have literacy, then the second thing that you learn is how things flow. So if you look at the earlier presentation and you look at law and the legal system, you'd say, a blockchain expert needs to sit down with a lawyer and construct that thing. And there aren't that many people who are technological lawyers. Those are, one is
arguably an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. So one argues words, and the other one is binary zeros and ones. And so you're never going to make the progression without putting these fields together. And that's what I mentioned earlier. I tell my kids, we're going to be merging fields. So you can't opt out of the field. And so the second category after literacy is you just have to learn how pieces fit together. And the temptation people have in opting out is to say, the third category, which is people who live inside those boxes, I can't be that because I didn't grow up that way, I'm not wired that way, my DNA isn't that way. But it's probably only 10% of the jobs where you require that deep technical expertise that you live in the box. And so the problem is that it's just as big a problem to pull people out of that box and say, go be a business person. Or pull someone out of that box and say, go drive organizational change. or get someone out of that box and say, go transform my industry. It's much easier to move in the other direction than, or I should say it's equally difficult to move in that direction as it is this direction. So that's kind of my advice. Don't opt out. Don't let yourself opt out. Don't let a presentation that's over your head or a meeting that you don't understand stop you, because eventually you're going to catch up and you're going to be the full force of whatever it is you have as your human potential. You'll get there, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's not ever going to happen if you opt out.
So we've talked about a number of things, and you just mentioned the notion of the future. So we've talked a little bit about blockchain, Internet of Things, a 5G network, both how they're transforming, disrupting, and in fact, the future that we face. How do you think about the future? What else about the future really intrigues you, or is something that you are following or watching its implications?
Yeah, you hit on three of the big ones. The man-machine interface is a really, really, really big deal. And so anybody who is an artist or has a right brain orientation, you hold the keys to the future of technology. Because in the future, whole brain thinking is going to be the scarcest skill. And we have a lot of left brain thinkers in the world. We have a lot of right brain thinkers. And I'm kind of counterintuitive here by saying I think the right brain ones can learn the left just as easy as the reverse. And the idea is, well, technologists shouldn't be figuring out processes and how machines interact with people. They shouldn't. They should be writing code. And that's what they're best equipped to do. And if we don't get that right, then we may start to build systems that are inherently not only subject to the kinds of manipulation that might move an election in a direction, but they may carry horrible biases that exist in the creators. And so I don't worry about the machine supplement to the man. I worry about the human deficiencies being transitioned into machines that are going to be hard to shut down. So I watch very closely AI and machine learning. And it's interesting because I'm pretty much an open book, but I always go back to, like, what am I doing at home about that? So my son is a brilliant technologist, and I told him, I want you to work on an ethics module. And I want you to build a block of code that for machine learning and AI can be run against to look for inherent biases. And so the goal, it's as ambitious as it sounds, is to build a way that someone can run their code and see if it has virtue to it. And that's a really ambitious thing, and the way we've structured the problem and all that, I think it's going to be a big deal. So I watch that closely, because I think that it's inevitable, because when a technology moves ahead, it's very difficult to hold it back. The saying that there's no army that can hold back an economic principle whose time has come. If anybody in the globe gets the capability, you have to move with them, because otherwise you could be a slave to a system you don't like. So I think that's something that, as a technology leader, I've got to be on top of, and I'm going to probably have to make some hard calls in the future of where and how. So when we did machine learning and automation at AT&T, I spent about 6 months meeting everybody I could, and we put together the 10 Commandments, if you will. But it says that every decision is owned by a human being. So nothing that goes on at AT&T has a machine accountability for it. And then if you're going to launch a bot, it's like a child, you own it. And if you change jobs, you have to turn that bot over for adoption to the new person. That's how maniacal we are. And a machine can't control a machine without a registration process that we know it. Everything that has a play button has to have a rewind button. And we have to put humanity into systems, and so we have checkpoints. And I think those are the kinds of things that are really important part of the next evolution, because blockchain, one of the things that people are most excited about is the restoration of trust. And the anonymity of technology challenges even good people, right? You don't want to put temptation in people's eyesight.
Well, we talk about that a lot in my business, the notion of digitization of trust when technology can be anonymous, and how do those two reconcile? And then as you think of an AI world, you can build in biases and other things that you don't even know you've done, and then how do you create an ecosystem that not only stays current, but stays free of some of the downsides of what you put in and what it can become. So.
Yeah. Well, code is like water. You know, it can get contaminated. And then once it's contaminated, it's a really hard problem to get it out.
So one of the things this conference is going to do is look at a whole series of industries for use cases and talk about how blockchain can enable them. So I guess as one of perhaps my closing question, how would you model for this group the notion of building an end-to-end use case for AT&T? What would your process be like as we go through, and today is finance, insurance, and other industries like that? How would you give the audience some insight on how to think about building end-to-end use cases using AT&T as an example?
It centers the difference between invention and innovation. Is, you know, invention doesn't necessarily have a customer on the other side. So if you build a process that says we're going to start from the customer back, it precludes you from missing the mark. And so that's why when I suggested that one of the things I would do if I had the magic wand is I would have the multi-CIO kind of panel that says, when this is done, I need it and I will buy it. And so it's just a question of, you know, economics to make it cost effective and functional to get the right design, but you're not sitting around wondering, is it a buyable item? And that's frankly one of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs do and do the early stage stuff. They build a problem in their head and then they go solve that problem, but they haven't really figured out that no one wants to pay to get that problem solved, or they don't want to pay as much as I thought they did. And the average entrepreneur would counter that by saying, well, really breakthrough stuff, people don't know that it's available, so they don't even know how to tell you what they're going to buy. And I don't get that. Like, you know, you look at digital watches, you know, for a decade, people played with digital watches and they forgot that they have to do two things, tell time and look good. And so the fact that they were digital and they were like a phone and did this and that, and so then finally it took almost a decade before someone, I think, sat down and said, what do you want in a watch? It has to look good and tell time. And then, oh, now there's this third feature, you want the battery to last a day, because the last thing you want to do is be looking for a charger for your watch before you charge your watch before you run to a meeting. And so those things are true all over the place. And I think if you're going to make a technology bet, particularly one that is this ambitious in scope, that it's a really wise thing to make sure that you have a customer on the other end of it.
So I know that you are an avid reader, and I think another thing I would ask you to share is if you were going to recommend just a handful of books that you think really have shaped your thinking or are really illustrative of the future and kind of what's in your mind as a technologist in your role that has that piece, what books would you recommend?
Well, I always use this as an opportunity to sound a little bit like a philosopher to the people in the room. I apologize for that. I always am reading 3 books at a time. The reason I get through such a volume of reading is the 3 categories are kind of light, heavy, and super heavy reading. So I'm never saying I don't want to pick up a book because there's a book that will match whether I'm exhausted or whether I'm super hyped up. And so it allows me to do things like be 58 years old and do a really deep dive on quantum physics or blockchain or whatever. And so there's a part of me that stays a technologist. So in that world, I would say to every person, you should read a book called Decoding the Universe, which really is about the future of where quantum is heading. Because if you think blockchain's mind-blowing, the thing after it, which is quantum, is getting its foundational building blocks, quantum physicists. And I was presenting to the group of these Nobel laureate physicists, and I applauded them because it dawned on me, and I was sitting here, I'm looking out, and I realized 70 years ago, those guys built a bomb. And also 50 years ago, they were figuring out how to put a person on the moon. And so when you put people like that against a problem, it's crazy what can happen. So the fact that they're working on quantum physics, which can kind of connect people in new ways, is such an extraordinary thing, and it'll be a gift to us. I think you should know that. And so I think in the little harder to read, Decoding the Universe is a great overview. I think in this whole idea of where we sit as a society today, we should read something that calms us down to realize we're not in foreign territory. We will get through these tough times. And so you can pick older books like Lessons of Civilization, which is a summary of 100 centuries and 100 pages. Or, Meacham's new book.
I read that, yeah.
Soul of, like
Soul of
something that
America.
says, The Soul of America, it says, we're going to get through this. And I think that's important for leaders because I think the world needs beacons of hope, not people that sit around and put fuel on the fire. And I think that I would suggest that. And then for this group, I think George Gilder's new book, Life After Google, is a really, really good read because what it does is it moves one level up from blockchain and it describes us moving from centralized systems, the cloud, to decentralized systems. And it's fascinating that scalable systems in nature are always fractal in design. So it sort of says, why are we going to blockchain? The easy answer to the question is because nature points us there. And it's not counter to nature. And so that's why I view it's an architectural shift that you couldn't hold back with, all of the will and economics that you would try to create. It's too big, too certain. So that's 3 quick recommendations. So that's the bottom line. I never suggest one book. I always suggest 3.
Well, you've got 3 swim lanes in your reading library. And I read The Soul of America, and you're right, the notion that it really, history of hope triumphing over fear and other things like that, and then from presidents to civil and civic leaders and the difference you can make. It's a wonderful read.
Well, I think, tying it back, though, to blockchain, I don't think when you go into a brand new big thing, you cannot ask yourself a few times, and then what? And then what?
What are the
and
ethics?
Then what?
And then
so
what?
that you don't end up getting yourself painted into a corner and said, ooh, I launched that thing and I didn't realize that was going to happen. So I think putting some of that perspective around this technological inevitability of blockchain is important for business and civic leaders to try to understand that stuff.
So the technological inevitability of blockchain. If you could blockchain anything with your kids, this is my final question, what would it be?
Wow. I trust my kids a lot. I hope it wouldn't be anything. We are not seeing the internet anymore. We're seeing a curated internet. We're raising a generation of digital natives who never go to the search engine page 2. And so there's inherent biases in that. And I don't think that we've replicated appropriately human systems. So if I could blockchain one thing, I would make sure that everything they're reading carries with it a warning flag. I always tell them the most important thing before you read a book is not to look at its title or take a recommendation. Go read the author, because you're about to spend 8 hours or 10 hours with that person speaking to you. If you would not have a conversation with them, do not read their book. Don't care what the book's about. That is just a one-way conversation. The internet is giving my kids a view of the world that doesn't have that discernment that you would have if you were at a bar or a restaurant. And so I'd love for that to be an application that they would see.
With that, we have enjoyed the opportunity to be here this morning. And John, thank you so much for your time, your travel, and being with us.